The Blood Omen was actually meant to indicate to us that a much better vampire action RPG was coming a year later. Hey everyone, I'm Roger the Retro Gaming Puppet, and this is a special spooky Halloween edition of Obscural Games. It's also part of the PlayStation Celebration and an Extra Life donor request. Which means that I kinda wish I had more positive things to say, but, well, let's go ahead and take a look at the first action RPG on the PlayStation that lets you play as a vampire. Blood Omen: The Legacy of Kain. Blood Omen was released on November 15th, 1996 for the PlayStation in North America, and the following year in Japan and Europe. And for a game that hit barely a year after the system itself, it's not bad, but this is one of those games that is the unfortunate victim of aging badly. While reviews at the time were largely positive in the 8 to 9 out of 10 range, even those reviews call attention to some of the factors that make it hard to go back to now. But let's set the stage a bit before we get to that stuff, eh? Silicon Knights and their former head Dennis Dyack are now infamous for a number of reasons, but back in the 90s they were a pretty small developer of DOS strategy games, before being contracted by Crystal Dynamics to work on this game, the first in the Legacy of Kain series. According to an interview from the time with Dyack, the game was originally slated for the 3DO, which Crystal Dynamics heavily supported, before it became clear that platform wasn't going to remain viable for long. The publisher then pushed for Saturn, but Dyack and producer Lyle Hall were apparently able to convince Crystal Dynamics brass to go with the PlayStation, due to the ease of programming for it. The game takes place in a dark fantasy world called Nosgoth, as the player takes on the role of nobleman turned vampire Kain, who is out for revenge on, well, everyone, basically. The people who killed him, the people who wanted him dead, and even the necromancer who facilitated his revenge, I think. The game plays out as a Zelda clone. In an era where Ocarina of Time wouldn't be seen for another 2 years, that means a top-down 2D game, with a large overworld map. And unfortunately, this is where things start to get a bit rough. Look, I'm just going to try to get all the negativity out of the way so I can focus on the couple two treat things I really did like about this game and the legacy. Haha, get it? The legacy this game left behind. The visuals of this game have aged incredibly badly. Playing in HD really brings this out with the awful Donkey Kong Country style pre-rendered assets, which I think is the worst aged video game aesthetic in history, coupled with the PS1's dithering and yikes. But we played quite a bit on a CRT as well, and it still looks pretty rough even there. Sometimes switches are especially hard to see, leading to more than one instance of wandering around an area before realizing, hey, that thing on the wall is a chain I can pull, not just the background. It looks even worse when you zoom out, which can help navigate some areas, but the worst thing about this is that it causes the game to slow down, in a way that even Gradius 3 on the Super NES looks at and goes, now that's slow, ain't it? I mean, this is horrible. And it can happen even without being in the game's zoomed out mode, but just wow. Speaking of slow, the most troublesome thing about the flow of this game is that there are constant loading times, and they're long. Some publications at the time compared them favorably to Resident Evil, but yeah, I can't go there. First of all, because the door animations at least fit the atmosphere that game is going for. But more than that, because opening your menu in RE1 is basically instantaneous, and Blood Omen, which has multiple submenus, can definitely not say the same. Finally, the combat is bad. There's no block or dodge, basically no defensive moves at all. And when harder hitting enemies show up, this is how combat goes. And boy, that gets tedious fast. So yeah, the game does have its problems, and I'll just tell you right now that these problems do prevent it from getting a wholehearted recommendation from your second favorite video game playing Blue Puppet. That said, I like to keep the vibes positive around here when I can, so we're going to talk about the cool stuff. This is the earliest console game I can think of where you unequivocally play as the bad guy. Sure, the byproduct of Kain's quest for revenge may restore Nosgoth to some extent, but considering you can not only kill, but drink the blood of innocents, many of whom are chained up in dungeons, there's not a lot of gray area here. Speaking of blood drinking, that's another thing I like. First of all, the slurping sound is great. But also, health is often readily available, because Kain can feed on any human enemy right before they die. It's like a precursor to Doom 2016's Glory Kill mechanic, or Splatterhouse 2010's Splatter Kill mechanic. You get a bonus for killing a weakened enemy in a certain way. Also, especially for its time, this game has pretty fantastic voice acting. Don't get me wrong, it's not on the level of most modern games, but this definitely is an area in which the game outdoes the original Resident Evil. In particular, Simon Templeman, who was already a working voice actor in animation by this time, does a fantastic job as Kain himself.
The cretin squandered life and left it seeping on the floor. Such waste was a travesty. Perhaps Nupraptor needed to be taught a lesson as to the value of blood.
And that contributes to the overall atmosphere, which is also pretty good here. Yeah, I said I think the graphics aren't great, but there's still a lot of spooky scenery and music that hits in the right way. Another thing I like, at least in theory, are Kain's different sub-weapons, spells, and abilities. From a thing that crushes human enemies to a wolf transformation, to eventually a flaming sword, the different stuff you can use to progress is pretty cool, even if I don't love the execution of the combat by and large. In a better game, this stuff would be super awesome. So yeah, it has some bright spots, and the final bright spot is where things went from here, both for the series itself and one of the creative voices behind the game. Blood Omen kicked off the Legacy of Kain series, which would reach much greater heights with the second game, internally developed by Crystal Dynamics themselves after a lawsuit between them and Silicon Knights ended with their ownership of the IP. Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver would be a much bigger hit on the PS1 and Dreamcast, and even though she worked on this game too, Soul Reaver would really be the launchpad for Amy Hennig's career, as she would leave Crystal Dynamics in the early aughts for Naughty Dog, where she would direct critical and commercial successes like Uncharted 2. The series itself burned bright, but as is so often the case in those situations, so hot that it flared out fast. There were 3 years between Blood Omen and Soul Reaver, but between 1999 and 2003, the series averaged 1 entry per year, until the release of the final game in the series, Defiance. Now, Crystal Dynamics is owned by Square Enix, and they've put the series in their collective system, which means indie developers can pitch games using the IP. That's how we got a new Fear Effect in 2018, so maybe we'll get a new take on Legacy of Kain someday.
I have accomplished my task.
So yeah, that's about it. Like I said, I wish I had more positive things to say, but, well, this one is really only of interest to big vampire aficionados or fans of the series of Legacy of Kain who maybe didn't get started until Soul Reaver? Yeah, you might go back and find something interesting here. Anyways, that does it for me, but make sure to come back before Halloween because Joe will be back with a special spooky Halloween edition of Same Name, Different Game to end the PlayStation celebration. And his game also stars a vampire. You won't want to miss it. Hey folks, it's Joe, and I just want to thank you so much for listening to Roger talk about Blood Omen, The Legacy of Kain. If you enjoyed what you just watched, do the things that everybody on this website asks you to do. Ring the stupid bell to make sure you get notifications. Subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, and leave a comment below telling me which is your favorite game in the Legacy of Kain series, or maybe which is your favorite Amy Hennig game. I'm a big fan of Uncharted 2 myself. If you really liked what you saw, consider supporting directly and financially, though you certainly don't have to. But if you'd like early access to new episodes, the chance to vote in polls about what future episodes will be, and things like that, including your name here with all of these cool people, consider supporting on Patreon or via YouTube membership for just $1 per video. You can also check out the description for other links like merch and links to small businesses that I get a little bit of a kickback for if you shop at. If you want more PlayStation celebration, the playlist is on the left, and if you want more spooky Halloween videos, that playlist is on the right.